Since 1947, no one has served a full term as Prime Minister of Pakistan. It's a story of partition, countries within countries, and even US interference that saw this happen just last year.
Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan has been arrested, sparking riots across the country. He was detained a day after the military issued a rare public rebuke of Khan.
Remember, this is the 5th most populated country in the world, and at the turn of the century, had a better GDP per capita than India. But as its enemy has risen, Pakistan has failed. And only the briefest look into history poses this question. What will end Pakistan first? Its military or its climate?
Joe, this Imran Khan stuff is insane.
Really?
I mean, the army and the CIA just decided they want him gone.
So to understand the sheer catastrophic state that Pakistan's in, we have to go back to colonial times. This kingdom right here was the British Raj, essentially British-owned India.
Mr. M, I need to stop you right there.
Gandhi.
The war was not just India, nor was it British-owned.
The man's got a point. Given that we're doing something colonial, I'm going to defer to my alter ego, Lord M History.
The reason why it was called India was because the Indus River ran through the kingdom. What many people won't realize is that this river is actually located in modern-day Pakistan. So what made Gandhi an important figure was not just that he advocated for independence from Britain, but that there be non-violence between Hindus, of which he was one, and Muslims. Given that the Raj was 2/3 Hindu and 1/4 Muslim, there was a bitter cultural divide. What you might also be surprised to know is that the Muslims were actually very scared of Britain leaving. As far as they were concerned, it was better to be under the control of someone who kept the Hindus at bay than the Hindus themselves.
The All India Muslim League was essentially the lobby group for Muslim interests to the British government. Up until 1937, this was actually an elitist group, but when Britain's opposition leader Clement Attlee publicly entertained Indian independence, they mobilised quickly. They were led by this guy, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Jinnah stood in stark opposition to the leader of the Indian nationalist movement, Jawaharlal Nehru. As India moved closer and closer to coming under the rule of Nehru's government, Jinnah's cry for partitioning the Raj into Hindu and Muslim territories grew louder. During the war, the UK government was really resistant to this idea. But after the war, something changed.
At the presidential palace in New Delhi, Khrushchev is guest at a reception. Addressing Parliament, he praises India's neutrality and Soviet progress.
Now, let's be clear, the Indian-Soviet relationship became much stronger after Stalin's death. However, as the British were withdrawing in 1947, it was clear that Nehru had a much warmer view of the Soviets than the US and the Brits. So splitting India and giving them frosty neighbours kind of made sense for both containing India and for creating a buffer between them and the Soviets. Because Pakistan was now a useful player in the Cold War, America intervened. First they provided general aid, then they provided military aid. And look how much was supplied to Pakistan throughout the 50s and the 60s. It amounted to over $1 billion. With their entire GDP only at about $3 to $8 billion in the 1960s, the US military aid made up a massive chunk of the economy, not to mention that Pakistan was spending 6% of its own GDP on defense. That's more than Russia, Israel, and America today. Point being, Pakistan's economy became entirely built around the military, and no surprises who became the power brokers in Pakistan. But here's the issue. Pakistan was an area partitioned on religion rather than ethnicity or language, and it's hard to overstate just how different each area is. For all our commentary on America being a divided nation, they at least speak the same language. Take this rural province right here, Balochistan. The two main languages of the province are Balochi and Pashto. Urdu, Pakistan's national language, is the first language for only about 0.4% of people. Compare this to areas like Punjab, where the overwhelming majority's language is of course Punjabi, and despite this being the largest spoken language in the country, Punjabi gets no constitutional recognition. In fact, many in Pakistan look down at native Urdu speakers for the language's Indian origins. So with Pakistan deeply divided, yet having such a powerful army, it needed unifying. And in came this guy.
I will finish what you started. Pakistan will be the world's biggest Muslim power.
So Zia ul-Haq was the army chief of staff and in 1977 launched a coup against Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. Under the old regime, the title of president was merely ceremonial, but ul-Haq returned it to one of power and made himself the president.
But, Mr. M, how did he plan on ending the division?
Simple. Begin the Islamization policy.
When I took over on 5th of July, I promised 3 things. I said, first and foremost, I will bring back the Islamic values. I will venture for the Islamization of laws.
Like I said before, Pakistan was created along religious rather than ethnic lines. So in theory, the different ethnicities could be unified under Islam. Zia introduced blasphemy laws, established separate Sharia law courts, and the zakat call for generosity became a mandatory 2.5% tax. I should also add that stoning was returned as a type of capital punishment. Now, Pakistan's road towards getting nukes really started back in 1971 when India supported Bangladesh breaking away from Pakistan to become its own nation. 3 years later, India successfully tested a nuclear weapon, and so Pakistan had moved to develop nukes themselves. However, much of the progress came under Zia, who threatened India with annihilation should they remotely cross Pakistan's borders. The 1970s had seen American military aid dry out, even completely so under Carter, who took issue with Zia. However, when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, Pakistan once again became useful, and the US tap poured into the pipeline of the Pakistani military. Eventually, Zia died in a plane crash. He was probably assassinated, but that's a story for another day. And in what was bad news for the Pakistani army, the Soviet Union also fell in 1991, leaving America no reason to fund their military. The 1990s then proved to be one of the more interesting eras in Pakistani geopolitics. With many Muslim Central Asian countries gaining independence from the Soviet Union, Pakistan sought to fill the power vacuum and offer infrastructure and trade deals to try and get in on their power reserves. The Pakistani government also engineered the idea of a pipeline from Turkmenistan to Pakistan. This was behaviour that you'd expect from America, or now China, but not Pakistan. To do that, they faced a slight issue. They had to go through Afghanistan.
I thought they were family.
No, certainly not. They'd been supporting Pashtun rebellions in each other's borders, and Pakistan even supported the Taliban taking over, partially to try and get this pipeline, which would make a fantastic setting for Fast and Furious 93. Like the video if you want to see Dom Toretto racing along the pipeline against some combined Soviet Taliban dude saying,
"See you in Islamabad."
However, the Taliban refused to endorse the Durin Line border, and relations between the two quickly deteriorated. Now, though the 90s saw US military aid go like this for Pakistan, the 2000s saw it go like this. Any guesses why? Well, I can't actually tell you because I'll get demonetized. Now, though Pakistan didn't have to aid the US in removing the Taliban from Afghanistan, they were keen on doing so to avoid falling on the wrong side of a US-Indian alliance. Pakistan let America use them for a base and received more aid than ever before, even when adjusted for inflation. And it was around this time that our boy Imran Khan entered the scene. Now, for the non-Commonwealth listeners, Imran Khan wasn't just a handy cricket player. He was insanely good and even captained Pakistan through their most successful period. His test bowling average was better than the world's current #1 test bowler Ravi Ashwin, and his batting average was better than England's captain Ben Stokes. Safe to say that in a cricket-mad country like Pakistan, this made him legendary. Now, democracy in Pakistan only ever extended to how far the military led it, and in the late 90s there were 2 main political parties. The first of these was this party, the Pakistan Muslim League. Essentially the privatisation party, or what you might call the centre-right party. Now, back in 1999, they were in power under this guy, Nawaz Sharif. However, in 1999, the military engineered a coup against his government and gained support from those within the PML. Essentially, General Pervez Musharraf seized control by declaring martial law, suspending the constitution, and making himself president. Those from the PML who supported the new military government became known as the PMLQ, while those who remained loyal to the exiled Nawaz Sharif became known as the PMLN, the N standing for Nawaz. The other major party was the Pakistan People's Party. They were a little more pro-nationalisation and would probably be classified as centre-left. Now, it was in this context that Khan's party, the Pakistan tehreek-e-insaf, was founded, and this translates to the Pakistan Justice Party. So just so we're all on the same page, the PMLQ was the privatisation/pro-military coup party, the PPP was the centre-left opposition, and the PTI was Khan's party. In 2002, Musharraf allowed parliamentary elections to be held, though he'd retained the office of president. Khan's PTI ran in these elections, though Khan was the only successful candidate. Interestingly, despite running against the PMLQ, the military supported the PTI because of Khan's legendary status, and it was also a way of hedging their bets should the PMLQ become unpopular. It also helped bleed votes away from the PPP. Now, of course, these were far from uninterfered elections, but the PMLQ won a majority and Khan expressed his support for the military government. Very quickly though, the tide turned against Musharraf's government, particularly for him suspending the constitution in 2007. The pressure became so much that he resigned in the same year and took exile in London.
For the good of the country, I have decided to resign from my post. My resignation will reach the Speaker of the National Assembly today.
In the new presidential elections, the PPP's candidate won, and they also won control of the parliament in the same year. Now, remember how I said the Pakistan Muslim League fractured into N and Q factions? Well, with Musharraf gone, Nawaz returned from exile, and the PMLN were once again the bigger of the two Muslim League parties. In fact, in 2013, Nawaz returned to the office of Prime Minister, with the PMLN dominating. In these 2013 elections, Khan's PTI also made a surge to gain 35 seats, and so the military's decision to head their bets was proving to be a prudent one. Probably the most important part of Nawaz Sharif's rule was that he slowly pushed for civilian control over the military and ultimately pushed for treason charges against its former leader, General Musharraf. Obviously, the military wasn't too pleased with this, and on top of that, relations with America had badly deteriorated since 2011 when the hide-and-seek champion was found to be in Pakistan after all. Remember, the US tap was what was enabling the Pakistani military to be so powerful. Now, I still haven't addressed the question. Why were the army so keen to specifically support Khan's PTI? Well, remember what it stands for: Pakistan Justice Party. Khan's messaging had been on cracking down on corruption and seeing corrupt politicians held accountable. For Khan and the military, they had one enemy in common: the political class. So at the back end of Nawaz Sharif's second stint in office, he was implicated in the Panama Papers. Essentially, these documents revealed that the Sharif family had numerous undeclared offshore properties and businesses. In 2017, the Supreme Court disqualified him from office, and then in 2018 he was given a lifetime ban from politics, and right before the 2018 election was imprisoned.
He's lost elections, he's been ousted in a coup and disqualified from office by the courts. But today, another nail was driven into the political coffin of three-time Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif.
Sharif accused the military of interfering in the elections to get a PTI victory. Regardless, when the elections actually took place, the PMLN conceded to Khan's PTI, who govern in coalition with some really small minor parties. So Khan was in, but it inherited the turmoil of 2 decades of instability, and to add to it, a budget and heavy deficit. Because of this, his government passed an austerity budget slashing spending, particularly on energy subsidies, while raising tax revenue by imposing tariffs on imports. By 2020, the deficit was reduced to less than 1% of their GDP. On top of this, he halted coal power for future construction projects, became the first South Asian government with an electric vehicle policy, plus an initiative to plant over 10 billion trees. Despite being the military's guy, it seemed like Pakistan might have had a semblance of a competent government. And you know how I told you the PTI campaigned on fighting against corruption? Well, in 2019, Khan made good on that promise and launched the anti-corruption campaign. The campaign was comprehensive, and the National Accountability Bureau, their version of ul-haq, recovered 487 billion rupees from Khan's election to 2021. This smashed the previous decade. However, not everyone viewed it that way. In fact, many actually viewed it as a political witch hunt to target Khan's enemies, and many viewed this as a very pro-military move. Even though more money was being recovered than before, Pakistan was slipping even lower on the corruption index. Khan's retort was that the campaign included his own party and that corruption was so rife that it was a campaign point for 2 decades before coming to power. But after this point, the relationship between Khan and the military really started to sour. When it came to the Kashmir border dispute with India, Khan called it a humanitarian rather than territorial issue and ruled out military intervention. On top of this, the relationship was strained when the army indicated that they wanted to remove Faiz Hamid as head of the ISI, Pakistan's intelligence agency. Khan refused, saying he wanted the replacement after a 2023 election. Eventually, Khan relented. However, reports continued to emerge of the military's frustration with Khan. The Army Chief of Staff, General Bajwa, was reportedly very worried that he was copping the blame for a faltering economy and that Khan wasn't open to military counsel. To add to this, Khan's foreign policy agenda shifted away from America. He said America withdrawing from Afghanistan was them breaking the shackles of slavery, but more importantly, months out, Khan had a scheduled visit to Moscow on February the 23rd, 2022. Does that date remind you of anything? Well, historically, this was important because it was the first time a Pakistani Prime Minister had visited Moscow since 1999. But just before the scheduled visit, Russia invaded Ukraine. Khan was faced with a decision: cancel the meeting or proceed. Khan chose to proceed and discuss the Pakistan Stream pipeline that Russia was developing with Putin. Khan also chose not to join the UN condemnation of Putin and remained officially neutral. For an institution which had long benefited from American funding, this was bad news. America was getting no return on its investment. With Khan alienating many in the military apparatus, a vote of no confidence was moved against him in April of 2022. Khan tried to stop the vote by dissolving parliament, but the Supreme Court ruled this as unconstitutional. The vote went ahead and some in the PTI defected to the opposition to give the vote 174 votes, a majority of 2. Even before the vote, Khan blamed the US for supporting a vote of no confidence and giving the green light to the military to get rid of him. America dismissed it as a conspiracy, but in August of 2023, The Intercept leaked a cable which seemed to validate Khan's concerns. In a March meeting between the American Assistant Secretary of State for South and Central Asian Affairs, Donald Lu, and Pakistan's ambassador to the US, Lu said, "I think if the no confidence vote against the Prime Minister succeeds, all will be forgiven in Washington because the Russia visit is being looked at as a decision by the Prime Minister. Otherwise, I think it will be tough going ahead." Upon Khan's dismissal, General Bajwa took command of foreign policy and was much more supportive of the Ukrainian war effort, while Nawaz Sharif's brother, Shahbaz Sharif, was appointed Prime Minister, with the PMLN returning to government. So I know the story's been beyond crazy so far, but it actually gets even crazier. So Khan got shot in a botched assassination attempt in November of 2022, and then in May of 2023, Khan was actually arrested on charges of corruption. There were massive protests against what seemed like a purely political arrest. These were absolutely insane, as 8 people were killed, over 190 police injured, and the historic Lahore house burnt down. Even military headquarters, theoretically the most secure premises in the country, were breached. Some have described it as Pakistan's January the 6th. So then after that, Khan was released on bail before in August being arrested for another corruption charge and being sentenced to jail for 3 years. However, on appeal, the sentence was suspended before yet another court ruled that he ought to be held in prison for breaching document security laws by mentioning and waving that cable. He's still in prison and faces 10 years if found guilty. Let me know in the comments below. Imran Khan, yes or no? Now, if all of that wasn't enough trouble for Pakistan, climate change not only threatens to devastate their nation, it already is devastating their nation. Pakistan is particularly at risk for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's tropical, so the heat waves are going to be about 100 times more likely. In 2022, Pakistan recorded a 51-degree day. That's 124 in Fahrenheit. It's estimated that climate change has increased the frequency of these heat waves from once in every 312 years to 1 in every 3 years. Now, that part of climate change isn't unique to Pakistan, but another aspect of it is. Climate change has been melting the glaciers in the Himalayas. This water then flows down into Pakistan, creating huge floods such as the 2022 floods. It's hard to overstate just how severe these floods were. 1,739 people died, nearly 13,000 were severely injured, and there was $14.9 billion of property damage. As Pakistan has a population density of nearly 10 times America and over 100 times Australia, climate change threatens to ghettoize the country by creating tens of millions of refugees. Suffice to say, this country has everything going against it. It's a nation divided into numerous ethnicities and languages. It's run by the military, who moves against the civilian government whenever they deviate from what is par for the course. It has a long history of its leaders being imprisoned or executed. America has enormous leverage over their foreign policy agenda, and it's being destroyed by climate change. But did you know that climate policy has been the death of more than one Australian Prime Minister, including this guy, Kevin Rudd? Click here to see why both the Australian and British Labor parties are in serious trouble.